Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me properly? Also in the back? Can you hear me well? Good. So let me take you on a journey through time. How did the world develop? Now, let me start in 1800. Back then, life expectancy was 35 years, and 85% of world population was living in extreme poverty. What was extreme poverty? How did we define it? During the last few years, less than $2 available income per day, calculated in GDP. And what you can see here, that's the international declaration, what levels of income we have. Level 1 is extreme poverty, 2, 3, 4. This is how we look at development on a global scale, at least. The United Nations is doing it. So let me press the button and watch the bubbles go. How did we do? So this dump is World War I. And what you see here on the left, the pink bubble, the big one is China, the smaller one is India. Look how they are growing, how fast they're catching up. Today, the average of the world population is living on level 3, and only less than 10% is living in extreme poverty. That's a huge achievement. And most people don't know those numbers. But what did it do? When we look at GDP as a measure of how well we did, we have a large chunk of entropy. We have violence, crime, drugs, energy, waste, damage. Why do people break into other people's home to steal things? We have health-related issues. And when we add that up, at least in 2004, that was the guess from Professor Nefyodov, we had 40% of global GDP entropy. This was destroying wealth, not creating wealth. So when we have 100% and we have 40% destroying wealth, and we all pay for that, did we do well?
Sorry, what is entropy?
The cost of entropy is violence, crime, drugs, social cost, etc. Okay, and health-related also has has two directions. One is when we take care of our health actively, that we live longer in a good state, and the other is when people are sick. Yeah. So what could be the cause of entropy? Society is not synchronized. So what we have is burnout. What we have, and this shows a Gallup study done for several years, the Gallup Engagement Index. And they're asking employees, are you engaged at work? So let me do an exercise with you. What percentage of employees do you think say I am engaged? I give you 3 options: 15%, 30%, and 50%. So who thinks 15% of the workforce is engaged? Raise your hand. 2, 5. Who thinks it's 30%? 3, 4, 5, 6. Who thinks it's 50? 1. It's
is that what they say? Or
what they say. What employees say. 50.
90.
You would say 90. Okay. The result of this Gallup survey is 15% on a global scale. That means 85% of the workforce is not engaged or dramatically disengaged. So how can we become more productive when 85% is not engaged? So, and even worse, in Western Europe, the people say there's only 10% engaged, and almost double 19% say we are actively disengaged. Shitty colleagues, bad boss, lousy company. So how can you run a company where double of your engaged workforce is actively disengaged? So what I think is that this is the biggest obstacle for growth and productivity of the world economy. And the cause is moral deficits. Because when we don't have moral, we don't have values in the companies, we don't have principles in the companies, and we can't align and we make bad decisions. So how did we get there? Probably all of you know this, the long economic cycles. When we started out at the steam engine, back then, 85% of world population lived in extreme poverty. And each cycle had a technological basic innovation to create this, or to make the next cycle a growth cycle. The last basic innovation was information technology. This happened in around 1970, at least this is where this long cycle is, unfolding, and it's still going on. So now we're at the brink for the next long economic cycle. And do we see a technological innovation? Well, we rather have a technocratic paradigm. Is all that technology that's around really helping to move on in a meaningful and helpful way? Now let's take a closer look. The year 1970, this was the beginning of the fifth long cycle. The world, or we as mankind, had footprint 1. That means we were using exact the amount of renewable resources our planet was able to reproduce. I believe what those people who calculated it did, and they did it right. In 1971, President Nixon signed the temporary suspension of Bretton Woods. So he took the US dollar off the gold standard. What was the consequence? They put the money press on, and they're printing money since then, not only in America, all around the globe. We're printing money to have more money around. So this opened the door for shareholder value. On the other hand, in 1972, we had the first climate conference, so the voices became louder about environment. So do we have an issue? Yes. We're meeting and we're discussing climate agreements and how fast we want to reduce it. So the last result from COP20 in Rome was we want to make up what we did over the last 200 years. So we want to cut down emissions and carbon and everything to zero. That's where we started in 1800, more or less. Maybe difficult. Again, another point of view, I already said, 1970, we had footprint 1. That means we had enough resources to feed the world without taking it from nature. And 21 is we need 1.7 planets. Okay, do we need to take it serious? Well, leave it up. But it's a fact that's discussed and it's there. And we can see it, and numbers are crunched. On the other hand, we still play the shareholder value game. Tesla is worth more than the biggest 9 car makers in the world. Is Tesla, is this a sustainable technology? Is this the future of mobility? Maybe, but at least the story is great. And on one day he was making more money than Mercedes market value was. Interesting. So, but is there hope? Yes, I think there's hope. 2 years ago, the 200 largest American companies committed to put purpose ahead of profit and to put their focus on value to customers. Is that new? No, it's not new, but they signed a treaty, and we're watching them, and especially America is watching them closely. But numbers show it could work. When we say that purpose is the preliminary to end up with more profit, a Harvard-Columbia study shows figures, Korn Ferry shows figures. So it's good for the profit of companies, it's good for the engagement of people, and as Harvard also found out, it's good for the long-term view for companies. So let me double down a bit on purpose. When we run companies by numbers only, and we, push people and figures and whatever we do with KPIs, we see that those companies over the long run get in trouble. And on the other hand, we see that people who create a purposeful strategy make better decisions and end up with better results. So what is purpose in the end doing? It connects the outside world with the inside. Because what's the purpose of a company? It's to create a customer. So we better know how to generate value for customers. That's where we need something to put out there and say, that's our promise, that's our position, that's what we want you to remember about us, that you buy from us and not from our competitors. We need to deliver this kind of value, so we need to have an organization and we need to have the right people to deliver the promised value, and we have to, or we better capture value for the companies. So we need processes, we need systems to generate money long term. So when we have purpose at the heart of a business strategy and make better decisions and find the right people and make them work in teams, we make better decisions. And then I think we don't have to ask about, are we inclusive or not? We will make inclusive decisions in respect of society, of people, and nature. So what should we do in essence? Return to capitalism as it was the initial idea. So it's not the question, is it inclusive or not? It's about long-term value, and that benefits all stakeholders, businesses, investors, employees, customers, governments, communities, and members of the society and the planet. We're working on this issue with customers since 20 years all around the globe with a big network, and try to make a difference that way. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the time consciousness. Please, the floor is to the audience. Are there any questions? Please, Aidan.
So in the recent debate about purpose, particularly around the time of the chief execs in the state, coming out with the purpose and values statement, some of the backdrop to Friedman's article around shareholder value was brought out. And what he said was more subtle than just it's about maximizing profits. What he said is that if management in big companies control a lot of resources, and if you give them a goal other than profit, they have a lot of power then, and they can use it whatever way they want because they have a very broad range of things that they can now support. And he's worried that was going to cause issues with freedom, but also issues around power and equality in the system. Because as we saw in the 70s and 80s before the MBO buyout, management in the States were using their money for their own purpose, was using shareholders' money for their own purpose. And that was the backdrop to his statement. And I think the problem with this is that when you look at purpose like that, how do you restrict the power of management when they can just say anything is part of their purpose?
Thank you. That's a very good point, because unfortunately Friedman is dead and he cannot help anymore. But what we see, and this is what I meant with the KPI thing, we're driving companies and people up and down the hill with key performance indicators. Too many and too many stupid ones. And that's the issue, because when you say, how much more are we going to do next year, when you sit in an analyst meeting, I think we're going to do 15% more profit and 20% more revenue. So then you go home and say, hey guys, I just committed in the analyst meeting, so now sit down and do it. So this leads to bad decisions. So what we need is long-term planning. What we need is an alignment of resources and a really calibration. What can a company do in a certain market segment on a longer term, and what do they want to stand for? And this, gives a company a clear focus. What's their core business and where should they not be working in? Because when we say we want to grow, we want, there's a niche to grow. There's another niche to grow. We buy another company. It's for growth's sake. And I think that's the difficulty. Some can deal with it in a meaningful way and many can't. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.